Good afternoon. As probably everyone here knows, the Living Legacy Foundation has the purpose of providing grants for college to either 2-year or 4-year or teaching or nursing certificate to employee children and grandchildren. Employees and their children. And this year we're on a campaign. The campaign runs from April, May, June. We're kind of almost halfway through the campaign. We're almost halfway to our goal. So if you haven't written a check yet, we would much appreciate you do so. So without further ado on advertising, I'd like to recognize, before I introduce John, thank the Stratmans who are ahead of our campaign and done an enormous amount of work. Judy and Terry work a lot, and they really deserve a lot of credit. Also, I'd like to recognize Ann and Alden Danner. John's parents are here, and we hope someday they might be residents, but we're not going to jump the gun on that. So let me get on with introducing John. John got his both undergraduate and graduate degree in electrical engineering at Stanford. Went on to work for some noted Silicon Valley companies like Oracle and Tandem and Silicon Graphics. And then John co-founded a company called Net Gravity. Now, this is back in 1995 when the internet was in its infancy, kind of like where AI is today. You know, we're so used to the internet now, it kind of runs everything. We don't think about how infinite it was in 1995. John's company came up with the idea of serving ads. And so they started, pardon?
Sorry.
Yeah. So all those ads you see when you do a Google, well, anyway. So it was very successful, and they had an IPO in 1998, only 3 years later. That was very successful, and they got acquired by a company called DoubleClick the next year. And DoubleClick, a few years later, got acquired by Google. So all those ads you see on Google, you know who to blame. The guy's right. So after selling Net Gravity, John was interested in education. I think it's been a lifelong interest of John's. And so he went to Vanderbilt and got his master's in education policy. And then went into teaching, public school teaching in Nashville, Tennessee. Did that for 3 years. And he subsequently founded a whole string of companies that he'll talk about one of them this afternoon that are focused on using AI as a means of improving education for young people, 8th grade and below. So without further ado, let me introduce John Danner.
There we go. Hi, guys. So as I said to Colin, I'm not great with slides, so I'm going to tell stories, and then we'll try to get the slides to somewhat match my stories. Where did the little clicker thing? Is this a little clicker thing? So I think the first story, actually, I want to ask you guys something first. So how many of you all play with AI at all? You use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude? How many of you in this room are doing that? Yeah, so maybe a third, something like that. You know, I was kind of reflecting on how it's probably been for everybody in this room when I know that for mom and dad, you know, they were kind of born at the time where radio was just starting. And so there was radio and TV and radio and then TV. And then, you know, it was a long march of technology that's changed over the last, 80 years. You know, and AI is kind of the latest thing. And so as an entrepreneur, you pay a lot of attention to what's going on. And when this happened, a couple things happened that were very kind of informative to me. One was I was at the TED conference. I don't know if you guys know TED. They have a big online presence. But this particular TED was kind of taken over by they're called AI doomers now. They think that AI is going to be the end. And so this entire conference was kind of like videos of killer drones and things like that. And, AI inventing, neurological weapons. And it was just incredible. And everybody at that conference kind of walked away and said, gosh, maybe I should just go skiing now because it doesn't seem like it matters what I do. And I think my takeaway was that can definitely happen. And, it's a possibility that the really bad scenarios do happen, but it's also a technology that's incredibly powerful. And so I think for those of us who are going to kind of remain in the world and not go off skiing or get out of here, how can we apply it? How can we do good with this new technology? And so my area is education, and I was excited to do that. The second thing that kind of was the immediate precedent before Flourish was that I was building software. Software is what I like to build. Schools are what I do build because you have to build schools a lot of times to have the impact you want to have, but schools are messy. I'm opening 2 schools in Phoenix in 88 days. So I can tell you the number of things that go wrong when you're trying to open a school is unbelievable. But when I was building this last software company, Project Read, which teaches reading to kids in school, I noticed the same pattern I'd seen before with technology in schools, where teachers would often use it as kind of a supplement on the side. I'm the reading teacher and I'm going to teach reading. And then this program over here, it can do some stuff, for some of the kids sometimes. But the thing with AI is that it's really quite good at kind of one-on-one instruction. So it's not like the old point and click ed tech things. This is like something talking to you. So, when I watched that kind of usage, I thought, education could take 25 years to kind of catch up with the way the world is. All my friends in Silicon Valley, they've already reinvented their companies. They laid off half the people, had AI do this, redeployed people to do that, because it's the incentive is you've got to move fast or else somebody will do it to you. And schools are different, right? They're largely government funded or nonprofits, et cetera, and they have different incentives. And so the idea behind Flourish is really to demonstrate what school could be like in a world where AI can actually do real things, as opposed to technology kind of on the side, which is the way school has been. What if technology actually did some heavy lifting? And what would the teacher's role be? And would that be better for kids? We think it will, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. So I think the point of this slide really is that the world is going to change very fast for young people. If you're my age or your age, whatever, it's we've had good lives and we've had good careers and we'll see. But, for my kids who are 21 and 23 or even younger, if you're 5 or 6 now, you're growing up in this world where all the things that we all thought were true, like study hard, go to a good college, go to grad school, get a good job as a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, all that could change quite dramatically over the next 20 years. And so I think you have to, as an educator, you kind of have to have an opinion about what's that mean? What can you do for kids so that they're best prepared for this new world? And our opinion is that, it's unlikely that the kid that knows the most chemistry in high school is the winner. It's more likely that the kid that has the best human skills is the winner. So, all those things we kicked out of education in the last 25 years, that's, in our opinion, coming back. So how do you help kids grow, their curiosity, their agency, their self-awareness, their empathy, their character, things like that? I went to Bellarmine, and Bellarmine has this social involvement corps. I don't know what it's called now, Wade, if you do, but you'd go out in the community and you'd help people. And I was a kind of a normal, selfish teenager, and I was like, boy, this is super annoying, right? It's just like, why am I doing this? What's the point? And it was school, so you just kind of had to do it. And of course, later on, I realized that it had a big effect on my life because I knew who all the people were who needed help and what their problems were and things like that. And so that empathy, even for a pretty non-empathic kind of kid, was really, really helpful. And so I think that while school has been like micro-focused on these academic standards for the last 25 years, I think there's a real opportunity now to kind of get back to some of these things that are about, great humans. And I think great humans, if I had a 5-year-old today, I would lean into the whatever makes you the most human is probably the thing that puts you in the best place when you graduate from high school or college. So let's see if I can tell this story. Just briefly on Flourish. So this is a brand new network. I started another network called Rocket Ship Public Schools in the charter era. About 25 schools now in 5 states, 12,000 kids. Very much every kid needs to learn all these academic standards, and we were good at it, and that went well. And Flourish is almost the opposite. Really, Flourish is, all those academic things matter, but all these human skills matter too. So how do we actually build a program that includes both of them, but doesn't do it? One of the problems with, there are a lot of terms, soft skills and human skills and social emotional learning. There are a lot of terms for this, all of which sound pretty squishy because they have been pretty squishy. And the problem with squishy things in schools is when you can't measure things in schools, it's hard for the leadership to know how you're doing. It's like, oh, well, we're doing all these things that we think help kids with their curiosity, but do we really know that? Did that work? And if you don't know it works, it's hard to be kind of rigorous and try to do it well. And so Flourish is this odd school where we're trying to do these things that would be thought of as squishy, but in kind of a very intentional way. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So as I said, the first 2 schools are in Phoenix. Well, our first school was a lab school in Nashville, and we'll probably close it at the end of the year. Tennessee paid us for 1 out of 12 children. So it's like, okay, I guess you don't want schools like this. And Arizona is one of the 2 states for this new form of school. These are private schools that get government reimbursement. Florida and Arizona are the 2 states that are kind of most mature in that area. So just kind of an aside why we're there. So these are our what we call superpowers. And lots of people who are deep in the area of kind of social emotional learning will say, well, why these? And my answer more or less is, well, I don't know, we had to start somewhere. I would not say we're at all 100% convinced that these 24 things are the things that if you have, you're going to do well in life, and we don't need to have anything else. Another good question is, on something like agency and curiosity, a lot of people would say those are probably pretty important. A question I get asked a lot is, well, maybe you should only focus on those, or maybe those are 90% of what make people successful in life or something like that. So I think what we're going to do over the next 10 or 20 years is measure. Here's kind of the study we're setting up to do. So we're kindergarten through 8th grade. When an 8th grader leaves us, we want to match them against a student, similar demographics, similar academic results, but one went to Flourish and one didn't, so that you can look at, well, what happens in high school? High school is the easiest thing to measure. Obviously we'd love to know what happens the rest of their life, but that's a pretty long-term study. So how's it go in high school? Do the Flourish kids, because they are more curious, they have a better plan, more self-awareness. Does that help them as they're navigating all this or not? So what I'm sure will happen is these 24 will change into other things over time, and we'll get weightings associated with them. So we say, you know, we've got to make sure that a student gets to a certain place on their curiosity or agency. I should also say that what we're not trying to do is say, okay, we want every student that leaves Flourish to be a 5 out of 5 on organization. You know, if you think about yourselves and kind of people you know who've been very successful, you can almost always name 2 or 3 things they're actually very, very good at. And you can also name several things that they're really not that good at, but they often don't have any completely fatal flaws. You know, they don't have things that are so low that it kind of gets in the way of them being effective. So we kind of think, you know, our job is, like most schools, you're trying to get to a level, probably a 3 out of 5, a 2 out of 5, where kids are aware of kind of their strengths and weaknesses and are not so challenged in an area that it really doesn't work, but then lean into the superpowers. So really, you know, if a student shows a huge amount of leadership ability, like do more of that. And the way that we do that is we're project-based. So kids are building things. They're building things in groups. And so it gives us a huge amount of opportunity to kind of focus on these human skills, these superpowers. And as we go, I would say we're a year in, so we're not very good at it yet. But as we go, we'll get better and better at knowing, okay, well, Johnny is starting this new project, and here are 2 or 3 skills that Johnny needs to work on. So let's make sure in this project we have certain things that he's got to do that are going to kind of push on that and make him more organized or let him assert his leadership more, so that as they're doing project after project for several years with Flourish, they're kind of increasing these skills in the way you would increase academic skills. You know, if you do a lot of math, you get better at math. If you do a lot of leadership, you get better at leadership. That's kind of our point of view, which, by the way, also is a little bit controversial. A lot of people say, well, no, like this person's curious, that person's not. That's just how it is. You can't grow your curiosity. So we're going to find that out too. Maybe that's true. Maybe there are certain things that, you know, maybe if you're a bad, well, we know some of these aren't true, but like, you know, maybe if you don't have empathy, it's extremely hard to improve that in the time that a child's in school with us. Could be possible. We're certainly going to try very hard, but in any of these areas, we'll find out how malleable these kind of human skills are as well. Let's keep going. Yeah, so this is basically just the Flourish is the opposite. So in the old model, very much academically focused, and this was based on No Child Left Behind, really from kind of 2001. So it was very good at measuring every student's reading and math abilities. And you know, when I was doing Rocket Ship and we were serving low income kids, that was really good because a lot of kids, especially Black and brown kids in lower income areas, were not doing that well, but because those scores weren't broken out, nobody really knew. You know, this was a big deal when we were starting in San Jose, when those numbers started to come out. There were a lot of people very unhappy that those numbers were out and that we could say, hey, you know, the Latino kids in this district are really not getting the same quality, you know, the same outcomes as other students. So that was really that era that was caused by No Child Left Behind. And we think this era is a little bit different, 2 ways. One, I think AI brings into question whether knowing more stuff matters. Knowing how to think always will matter, but the amount you know may be less important now that you can look it up in, you know, 100 microseconds than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So that's one theory, is that knowledge itself gets less important. It could be that attaining knowledge and the things that it causes you to learn along the way, the skills, is still very important. That's our point of view. critical thinking, things like that, but that the knowledge itself is probably not that important. And if you look at the standards for K-12, there are a huge number of standards that are very much knowledge standards. It's just, do you know this fact? Especially, there's some things in social studies that, I'd say if I gave you that test, not many people would know the exact reason or date for certain historical events because it's not super relevant in any of our lives. We kind of vaguely know, but do you need to exactly know? Is that going to really set you apart? So I think that was that era. And this era now, I think you've got this challenge to knowledge, like what is the point of having knowledge? But you also have these tools, these AI tools that can help us to do completely different things in the classroom. And we'll talk a little bit about, what we can do with the tools. Okay. So this is going to sound a little bit science fiction-y. So just bear with me. It'll also sound creepy because it sounds creepy to everyone, I think, at the start. So one of the things we do is we have mics in our classroom. They're all over the place and they capture conversations. So we throw out all the audio because we don't want anything identifiable with children, but the conversations kids are having as they're working on projects are incredibly valuable when you're judging human skills. So if you want to know, is Johnny curious, then Johnny 10 or 15 times a day finds out some new thing. What's he do about that? Does he go deeper? Does he find out more? Or does it just kind of fly right by him every time? And so because we have a huge amount of these transcripts on student speech, we can look at each student and say, how are they doing in each of these 24 superpowers? And what we did about 9 months ago now is that we had our lead teacher in Nashville evaluate every single kid. So we've got 12 kids in the lab school, 24 superpowers. So they had to do all this, which she was not very happy about, but she did it. And then we had the AI do the same thing. I'm kind of curious. I wouldn't have guessed this, but I'm curious. How many people think that the AI got over 50% of her ratings accurate, that it rated the same as her? What would you guess? Anybody? One, two, couple? So it was out of the box, no prompting, just try it. It was 65% correct. And if you think about that, we had to think about it a little bit. It just has an enormous amount of information with all these conversations that have happened to make these judgments. And so if you assume our lead teacher is pretty good at kind of what teachers do, which is you fly by and you see what's going on and you kind of make an assessment in the fly, the teacher probably has 1/100th the information as the AI has by listening to everything all day long. So it was pretty good. But then we had the teacher say when it got it wrong. So let's say that the teacher said, this kid is a 3 out of 5 on curiosity, and the AI said, no, that kid's a 2. The teacher would say, no, they're a 3, and here's why. Here's my reasoning. And if you think about that for this AI, what you're doing is you're explaining to it what you really mean by curiosity. You've got a rubric, you've got kind of, this is what a kid does at level 1 or 2 or 3, but you're giving it more information to make its decisions. And so it immediately went from 65% predicting her ratings to 80%. Just one pass, 80%. She's done it 2 more times. She's very unhappy every time she does it. But she's done it 2 more times and it went to 85% and then to 92%. So 92% of the time now, it basically comes up with the exact same rating she does. And when you ask her, she says, I don't really think about it anymore. Sometimes I'll go and look at like what its reasoning is. Why did it put a kid in that category? But more or less, I just trust that, it's right. And once a teacher gets to the point where they trust that, then it's a question, okay, Johnny's a 2. What should I do to get Johnny to a 3? Like, what are the things to do? And the amazing thing, this is actually all of this stuff I've said before is the like pre-work to get to that point. That's the interesting part to me. If you want to improve kind of people's human skills in a rigorous way where you're measuring it and trying something and measuring again, then the only challenge is that nobody's actually ever done it that way before. Nobody's really measured these skills at that level and kind of, with an experimental framework. So I think the next 10 or 20 years will be us trying a lot of stuff. For example, we're project-based. Most people would say that agency and curiosity are improved through project-based learning. Something that looks like a Montessori classroom, most people would say that causes students to have more agency. We think so too, but we're going to measure it. So maybe we're going to find out, what it does for most of our kids. And I say, when I speak to educators, almost everybody in education, I would say right now, is in the just say no category on AI. Like, AI is bad, it causes cheating, like there's just nothing good about this. And, I think that's a pretty normal reaction, and there are totally legitimate concerns. But I think the challenge we always face in these technological changes is it tends to be technical people like me that kind of jump on first. And almost always the dialogue is, well, let's take this technical thing and we'll use it to do technically good things, but not necessarily in the interest of people, right? And so there's a company in my area called Alpha. Alpha's down in Texas, and they say, well, we have AI teach all of the academic standards, and because that, we don't need to hire teachers anymore. We hire, whatever, the camp counselor or whatever, and that is, in a very political world that we live in education, that could not be more tone deaf. But even if you move a step from that, let's use AI to do these things, it's a legitimate concern for a teacher to have, to say, well, gosh, you've got it doing this thing that I used to do. What's my job? And, our answer to what your job is you've now taken all this stuff you used to have to do off your plate. Now you actually have time for the kids again. And I give this analogy, when I was hiring for Rocket Ship, I would hire for people that were great with kids and loved kids, but also people that had great content knowledge and pedagogical skills. And if I had to choose between the two, I'd choose the latter. I'd choose the pedagogical skills because they're hard to learn. In this world where AI is doing a huge amount of the instruction, and by the way, just like Alpha, we do almost all of our tier 1 instruction with AI. So we're lowering the bar on like what kind of knowledge you need to have as a teacher, but we're raising the bar on kind of the human connection side. So in the rocket ship world, I had to hire content masters. In this world, I hire basically the people with the best human skills. And that is so much more pleasurable to hire somebody that's going into a classroom of kids that loves kids. It's just, you can tell, you do one sample lesson and all the kids are just like milling around them, loving them. And you're like, that's the person that should be there. So, yeah, that's the change that we're hoping happens. We don't need to go into that stuff. Yeah, this is basically just saying, school doesn't have to be as much of a grind as it's been, I'd say, the last 25 years. For those of you that have kids, grandkids, maybe even great grandkids going through it, we become kind of like the most efficient we can be on kids learning academic things, and it's just a fairly joyless world. So I think, project-based, focus on human skills, teachers having time to connect with kids, I think, a lot more people are going to enjoy their job. I don't know. By the way, these slides were all made by AI. 100%. They just read our website, made them, and they're not bad. It doesn't tell the story the same way. Yeah, we're changing education forever. So anyway, that's the idea. I don't know how I did on time. Yeah, see, I've got a pretty good clock back here. So I'd love to chat. We can chat AI or education or whatever people are interested in. He's going to give you a mic.
Thank you for a most thought-provoking presentation. Two questions that I immediately thought of were, you have a matched comparison group for evaluating your program. That's great. What are your outcome measures when they get to high school?
I would love to know your thoughts. We haven't done the study yet.
It's your project.
Yeah, I mean, what I think we will use as outcome measures is the only ones really available, which are things like high school graduation rate, attendance, some tests thing, which you would say, well, that's not fair. You're teaching all these human skills, but they're taking this other test. But we actually think that if you're more curious, you figured out your life better, you'll probably do better on the test anyway. So we're okay kind of taking the other side's test because we still think we'll do better.
I'll look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you. Thank you.
You are having one teacher teach your AI how to evaluate the kids. How do you know that that one teacher actually has the way of measuring what's happening?
Right. That's why I say jokingly, we've now taught an AI to think just like this one lead teacher. I'm not sure that's where we want to be, but we'll have 4 teachers next year, and then we'll have 12, et cetera. And so basically this process of evaluation and feedback will continue. And I think there's a possibility that it's only good at learning what one person thinks, but I think it's pretty good when you're feeding it a lot of feedback at learning. I think actually if there is a problem, it'll be more on the human side, which is like, making sure that all of our teachers have a similar kind of idea of what curiosity is or whatever. We haven't been rigorous about it yet. But that would be my guess. I think the AI, given that teacher feedback, will always show that kind of improvement cycle. So if it's got 4 teachers, it'll match them better over time. But we do have to be aligned on our side, us humans. Yeah.
Thank you for being here. I know your mom. We raised a lot of money together.
I'm shocked.
So my question is, this is a hard sell for some people.
Yes.
How are you going about raising the money? And then my second question is, what can we do here as residents to encourage our staff, particularly our servers, to live in this kind of world?
Yeah. I think that's both are good questions. Fundraising. So one privilege of having done this many, many times is that it's not hard for me to raise money anymore. We raised several $1 million kind of up front from a bunch of friends. So, that part's easy, thankfully, which, is a tremendous value because then you don't need to prove as many things to as many people as you go along. I think the question of what, if you're a server here or you're kind of a normal working class family, what you do now, I think it's a pretty deep thought. So my brother works for Tesla. Tesla shut down the line that he was on, which was Model S and Model X cars, and is now rebuilding it to build Optimus robots. And Jeff will be working on the Optimus robots. If you believe 1/10 of what Elon Musk says about the capabilities of robots over the next 10 or 20 years, it's going to pretty completely change the way that kind of normal kind of labor happens in our world, because the economics, of course, of paying one time for a robot and then it just does all this stuff for 20 years, that's going to be hard to beat. So one reason I'm in education is I always struggle with if you're 40 years old and you need to retrain, what should you do? It's much easier for me to think about if you're a young kid and you've got all the opportunities possible to create, what do you do? But I think that, if we think about like where's the pain in society going to come from over the next 10 or 20 years, I actually think it's there. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change and job loss. It's going to happen there. And if you've got a good suggestion for working class families, I'd love to hear it.
One thing I'd say is ask open-ended. One thing I found really works is asking open-ended questions of people who work for you or with you. That way you draw out where they're at and you can much better engage them in some of these softer skills that are going to be more important as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, I didn't talk about it here, but we spent a lot of time on what we call passions. So what's a student actually interested in? Which, you know, again, is I think if you went back 50 years and you looked at education, that was a lot more a part of education back then. It's like trying to figure out what each child really wants to do, et cetera. There were vocational tracks. There were a lot of things that you could do, and that kind of just all got wiped out. I think that's incredibly important over the next 20 years, because you've just got to assume that it's probably more likely you create your own job than that you get a job from someone else. The rate at which automation is going to happen now is so high that, you know, I think about, you know, my daughter and her boyfriend. So she went to college. She did pre-med. She decided she didn't want to be a doctor. She gets out a couple of years ago, and basically what's happening is, you know, the bottom rung of the ladder in all fields is kind of just being rolled up. It's like, well, we don't need those junior staff members anymore because we've automated that. We were outsourcing for a while, but now we can automate it. You know, so she ended up working for a law firm. I think she'll enjoy that. That'll be great. But her boyfriend, who was in sales, in high-tech sales, lost his job a couple months ago and is trying to find a new job. And really, as we speak, kind of the entry-level sales jobs are getting automated. So it's incredibly difficult for someone that age to figure out, you know, what to do and kind of how to change their life. So I think these passions it's important, because if you know, what I really care about is the environment, or I just love chemistry. Whatever it is that you love and you're laid off and things don't go quite right, you still got the thing you love. You're likely to keep tinkering with it, et cetera. And it's way more likely to be something you find a path in, I think, than, oh, well, you know, I heard that, you know, being a doctor was the right thing to do. So I did all these things, and then you don't get a job and you're disappointed. So I don't know. I think passions are going to be a big part.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, a lot of times you hear about education and AI, and AI being the thing that will help the student, but not necessarily help them to do it themselves. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a crutch.
Yeah.
And does that really fit into what you're trying to do here? Because it certainly allows them to use those crutches.
Yeah. It's a good question, because it's always hard to know how much of just to really ground that. I would say one of the major criticisms of AI is in writing. So, you know, if you were a middle or a high school English or history teacher and you had kids write papers and things like that, you know, all of a sudden the papers just got really quite good. And right, so people are deploying their cheating tools and their anti-cheating tools. You know, there's kind of this arms race with the kids and the teachers. I guess my point of view just from the workforce is that I'm elated when one of my people figures out how to use AI to do one of their tasks. So, for example, we have this big plan for our enrollment in the new school, and I really, really pushed my co-founder to use AI more to move faster on that. So if you think about it from that lens, I mean, I guess we could lament the fact that their, you know, grammar isn't as good, or their composition skills or whatever, but it is definitely true that when you're using a tool like AI to present something, it's not like you just, I mean, some students will do this, just generate it and not even look at it. But the way to do it well is to work with AI to come up with what you're trying to say and give it feedback and things like that. And I think that's ultimately what's relevant is when you get out into the world, like what's the real expectation? And I think my expectations for my employees have little to do with what my expectations would be at Rocket Ship, for example.
Let me give you the attitude from an elderly type.
Yeah.
And that is you're dealing with something that's running on electricity. If it doesn't have electricity, it doesn't run. What do you do now? Because, you know, in my view, a GPS is wonderful, but I still carry paper maps.
Right. Can I tell you a funny story? You'll love this story. So, one of our main theories on curiosity is that if you allow a student anytime they're thinking about something to ask AI about it and kind of get into a conversation, that improves curiosity. It's a little bit like using Google or whatever. It's like, oh, I don't know this. Let me find out more. Like that feels like it increases curiosity. So we do that a lot. Kids can chat anytime they want. And one day the internet went out. So like literally you can't do any of this stuff. It's all shut down. And I talked to our lead teacher after that day and she said, John, it was the longest day of my life. Because we've trained all the kids to want to know all the things they don't know right away and have somebody explain it. Internet's gone, and so every hand goes up all day. She said, I must have answered 450 questions today. And so you kind of step back and you say, well, I think that's actually good because most of the time the internet is up. Most of the time the AI doesn't break, and they're learning how to use these tools in a way that's really going to advantage them. You're totally right. When the internet's down, it's a rough day. Totally.
I think the encouraging thing about that, John, was that all the hands went up.
Yeah.
I find that really encouraging.
Yeah. Total engagement.
I wanted to know if you've seen the documentary called The AI Doc.
No.
That was out. Well, I saw it the last night in the theater here, and I was the only person in the theater. But I think it's now on Prime.
Okay.
And the man who did the interviewing, he was able, in the first half, he interviewed a lot of the top scientists at the major companies. And it was a little depressing because they all had concerns. But then about the halfway point, he talks to someone about the medical applications. And I mean, this guy is off the wall and it seems so exciting.
Amazing.
And then he interviewed 3 of the CEOs of the top 5 companies. Of course, people like Zuckerberg didn't want to be interviewed. Altman was, and I've heard so many things about him. But, you know, he asked the questions that I think we would all ask. So I'm trying to, you know, get us to show it here because I just felt it was eye-opening. I mean, they said part of it, because one guy kind of said, if we are the most mature that we could possibly be, it'll all be okay. And then you think, oh, well, look around at the world today. But you might, I think it's on Prime. So
cool. I mean, yes, I've said this to mom and dad before, like, you know, if you can last a few more years, I think AI is going to solve a huge number of the health issues that are out there right now. I mean, really what's happened is that health has been, like education, one of the least digitized things there is. So we don't have simulations of the body or the brain or anything like that. And so AI can't really do much, but that's moving very, very quickly now. And I'm extremely optimistic about what AI will do in that area.
John, thank you. So I think one of the things that we're seeing with the digital world and streaming is a lack of patience and a need for immediacy.
Yes.
Let alone, although it sounds mundane, the very realistic problem of kids in front of screens.
Yep.
And so unless you correct this picture in my head, I have a picture of a room full of kids being taught that they need immediate response on their questions from screens. And the people in this room have all, and you, including you, have benefited through our lives from boredom and patience.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what you make of that.
So two pieces of this. I'm going to divide your question in half. One is the screen question, which I think is important. The other is the immediacy and patience issue, which is for sure true. Everybody that has kids, grandkids knows. I'm not sure that is going to change much. Like, I feel like what's happening now is this speed up. And because of the speed up, the 20-year-olds and the 10-year-olds, they're just that's just their thing. They move at that speed now, and they don't have a lot of patience. And obviously there are parenting aspects of that, but like, it's hard. So yeah, that's a big change. The screen issue, though, I think is actually very interesting. So here's my prediction. I don't think that all of us or our kids are going to be using screens for a lot of things. Basically, if you think about screens now, screens are like kind of the only thing. You're either on your phone or your computer if you're working with technology. And I think that's going to change dramatically. So both OpenAI and Apple, while they haven't really been totally clear on the devices they're building, they're very likely to be audio devices, so that you've got like AirPods in your ears and you can ask questions and things like that. I think both of them are going to go down that route. And what that really means for us at Flourish is that there are going to be times where like you're getting writing feedback and you're in kind of a tight loop and you're on a screen on your computer. But for most of these things, like, something's mentioned and you don't know anything about it, you're just going to ask and get a response right then and there. And that, to me, is kind of the point in a project-based classroom. We don't want things that get in the way of the group and kind of that vibe, but we do want kids to be just as curious. We want them to seek understanding at all times. And so I think that the screen part in 5 years will not be the main way that we access most of this information.
My other question goes back to how you're measuring things, because you've already had to plug in to the AI component a set of criteria to match against your teacher.
Yeah.
And of course, the selection of your teachers is a fascinating area. And I'm just wondering, AI actually means more than one thing to many people. To most of us, it's this large language model, so it does searching really well.
Yeah.
So what's the criteria that you're working with now? I assume you have obviously you only have what you have. Yeah. But what if I lift the engine, what do I see?
Yeah, I mean, it's very simple above kind of the level of what the AI is doing. We're just telling it, we think curiosity looks like this. Here's what a not curious kid does. Here's what a semi-curious kid does. Here's what a very curious kid does. That's all in kind of just natural language in English. And then through the interpretation of the teacher, we add to that, oh, no, that's not what we meant. We meant this, right? And so at our level, the prompting that, the input we're giving to the AI is actually quite simple. What's not simple is the amount of data it's getting in these transcripts from the kids. So I was just talking to some friends last night. The most expensive computer intensive thing we do at Flourish is that, because it's processing literally just, thousands of conversations every time it goes through this, and you kind of have to have it do it fresh every time. So the processing is significant, but the setup is actually pretty simple.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, how do you envision training the teachers in this method? Because I taught school for many years, and
I should have asked that question. How many teachers do we have here? Yeah, I figured.
Yeah, I mean, in realistic terms, how does that work?
Yeah, so really, at this point, I can only say what has gone on with our lead teacher. So she was a 18-year educator, pretty kind of charter school standards based stuff. And so when she started, she felt very nervous when she wasn't kind of giving direct instruction to children on things and kind of like working through worksheets and things like that. And we basically just had to say to her over and over, Dana, chill out. It'll be okay. And as she watched all of the stuff happening, she realized, oh, my job changed. In the past, here's how she said it. In the past, I would hand the kids a packet of stuff to do, and then I would give them feedback as they do it. Now I said, well, what do you want to do? And then when they want to do something, I have to make sure they're working on the right thing. And when they're working on it, I have to make sure that they're being asked the right questions and things like that. But my job is almost never to say, to be kind of the arbiter of truth anymore. Like, oh, well, this is how that works or whatever. That's kind of dealt with by the underlying technology in the classroom. So if you asked her, and we're closing that school and she's going off to get kind of a normal job again, she said, I'm happy I did this because I realize how much of the stress that I was having in my life was related to the things that I used to do before. She would say, like, it's just much more pleasurable when your main job is to look around the room, figure out which kids seem to be confused or struggling, and go over and have the time to help them. I mean, she often says it's the greatest luxury to be able to spend 5 or 10 minutes with a child, without saying, oh my gosh, I'm not keeping on pace or all these things. And so I think that's hopefully what happens because of this. As you offload the direct instructional delivery piece, it means that the teachers kind of feel less pressure to perform, pressure to keep pace, and their job is to kind of make sure that the kids know what's going on. And I kind of feel like, Rocket Ship had many, many teachers, many, many schools. My perception was that so often the way that teachers connected with students had much more impact than kind of the content delivery side. But if you ask the teachers, if you said something like that to them, they'd say, well, then, why are you making me do this all day long? Because I also know that if I had more time with this child, I would do it. So I think Flourish in some ways is a way of shifting time. It's like the time doesn't need to be spent on that. So now what? I find it, I understand why teachers are worried that, oh my gosh, you just took my old job. What's my job now? And, I don't think we're ever going to lose the human aspect of education, because it's when a child is 8 years old, they've got a lot of stuff other than the fact that they don't know math, that they don't know how to read. They've got lots of motivational issues and things in life. So I just think that's the difference in the job. And we'll see when we have to train lots of teachers how well they do it. I can say, in kind of, we have many fellows right now. They're all kind of, there's this aha moment when we're talking to them about our program where they say, oh, well, thank God. Because almost nobody becomes a teacher. I mean, there may be some high school teachers become teachers because they love the subject material and they're willing to tolerate the kids. But almost always it's the opposite. You go into teaching because you love kids, and then somebody says, oh, by the way, you need to learn how to teach reading. So you do that, right? So I don't know.
Okay, I have two as well. Bob mentioned electricity. The other elephant in the room is security. And then my second notion is describe a typical project that they might work on.
Yeah. And security, do you mean privacy, or do you mean like somebody breaking in?
No, I mean like privacy.
Yeah. I do think this, so I was just talking to a guy yesterday that consults with a lot of school districts, and this is a big challenge, because the school district policy that's worked now for about 20 years has been that no data kind of comes in or out of our school district. Just no data is better because we don't need it. We just do all of our things. We don't need any of that. In the AI world, the more data you have, the better you do. So one of the reasons that I'm very happy to be doing private schools as opposed to trying to figure out how to get a district to do any of the things we're doing is that as a private school, your relationship is really with the parent, and we show them kind of what we're doing with the transcripts and things like that. The students own their data. So if a student says, hey, you got to get rid of it, I'm not comfortable with this, great. You're not going to have any superpowers, but that's okay. And so we have to figure out kind of with our parents how we do that. Whereas with a district, there's actually nothing, by the way, that's against FERPA, which is the main law around privacy in schools, where you can't collect transcripts, but it's never been done at any scale. So I think they'll actually spend a few years arguing about kind of, is it good to have data, if it's useful, that kind of thing. Oh, sorry. So we do all kinds of projects. What I'll describe as our project builder. So we have a piece of the product that a student comes into. Let's say they just finished a project. They're trying to figure out what to do next. And it basically uses these three inputs: superpowers, the human skills, like what are you working on? Standards, what have you mastered? What have you mastered on the kind of AI side, and now it's time to apply it so you actually retain it, understand it, etc. And then these passions. So what are you interested in? And I'll tell you another thing that's interesting about passions. So because we have transcripts and we're analyzing them, we pop up a set of things that student has been talking about for the last several days. Like it could be soccer or Pokemon or whatever, and we say, would you like to do a project related to that? And you can imagine from a motivation standpoint, that's a lot more interesting than, Flourish making a project for you. So we take those as inputs. We have a structure to these projects, the questions you need to answer for a certain type of project and the outputs that you need to create. But then the student is actually designing the project with our AI coach. So the first step is okay, you're making a project. Here's what it's going to look like. And we actually human curate that a little bit now with the teacher. The teacher will come over and look and see, okay, that makes sense to me. You're doing the right thing. But ultimately, we probably won't even need to do that. We'll kind of get to a point where the AI input and stuff works well enough. But so then they finish that, and then they just start working on it. So it's 100% custom to each student. We do surface previously created projects, which a lot of times kids like to do. So if one kid did a project and is presenting on it, the other kids will be like, oh, that's cool. I want to do that one too. So they'll do it too. But it's designed to be completely personalized.
You pointed out earlier that we may not need as many facts and so forth because those can be gotten easily through AI. But schools also teach brains to think, teach minds to think. And let me give you an example of that. One of the challenges, well, at least it was a challenge for me in school, is writing essays. That was never easy.
Yeah.
It happened over multiple years. And I think that applies to a lot of other people and not just me. But now with AI, if you can get AI to do all of those essays for you, that fact may be okay, but what my concern is, you haven't gone through the mental process, the mental challenges, the mental organization, and all those kind of things that you learn. How are you going to handle that? Will it be handled through other projects or something?
Yeah, no, that's why I think the first question was a good question. We've aggregated the facts and the skills together in school forever. And I'll give you a story. So one of my professors at Stanford, double E professor, who's a pretty famous dude, I was talking to him like a couple months ago about what we're doing, and he said, hey, what class did you take from me? And I said Fourier transforms, which is a crazy double E math thing, right? And he said, well, what do you remember about it? And I said, Professor, I have to admit, I don't really have any memory of how to do a Fourier transform. And he's like, well, geez, what did you learn? I said, well, you taught me how to think about complex things. I said, good, that was the point. So I think just to your point, like the actual idea is like, what's the skill you learn, not what fact did you retain? And so I think, we certainly believe that projects are pretty good for learning kind of those skills, because applying things often like make you think a little bit more deeply about them. But I do think it's a good question if there will be anything lost by the AI kind of tutoring and working with kids on other things. I think we're going to discover like what's good and what's bad about that and what to do about it. We don't have the answer yet. Sorry.
Hi. The idea of project-based learning, excuse me, my voice is, I've lost it. Project-based learning is not new.
Yeah.
And I've been to many conferences on it, and I've always thought it was wonderful to teach many of the characteristics that you are after. Also, socio-cultural learning is the same thing. Now, there are schools all over the country, including district schools in urban areas that are already doing project-based learning, which is extraordinary. And you must learn, teachers have to be taught how to do that. So I want to know, why is this any different from a project-based learning school with sociocultural learning, and then just adding the AI component, which some schools are doing? And I think we have to, as citizens of the world, start thinking about what are we going to do with our urban schools, our public schools, small schools with trained teachers doing project-based learning and sociocultural learning, of course, are going to produce children who can critically think, etc.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story. So the short answer is, the big difference between what we're doing with project-based learning and what Big Picture Company, for example, is a big network of project-based learning schools, we measure. And really, that sounds not that important, but in a school, right, if you can measure something, you can start to figure out what works and how to improve. And the main knock against project-based learning has been like, yeah, all those things are really important, but how do you know if anything you did was successful? And you say, well, look at the kids, they're doing great. And then, school leaders don't think that way. So I think the measurement is important. And let me tell you kind of a story. I was on a panel 3 weeks ago at a conference, and one of the other panelists was the head of schools for Sao Paulo, Brazil, which is, it's big. I don't know. There's a lot of kids. And he was in the completely hardcore, if it's not an academic standard, I don't want to talk about it camp. And so we were talking about that. And I said, well, do you think agency or curiosity or any of these other things is important? He said, yeah, but I can't do anything with those. And he made a lot of other comments like, I don't really care if kids have fun, blah, blah, blah. And I said, and as we were talking, I said, well, now, if you could measure those things and you believed in the measurement, that you believed that, these were correct assessments, what would you do then? And he said, I'd do it tomorrow. So for a lot of school leaders, when you can actually move it into their realm of like kind of measurement, they're all for it, because every educator kind of knows this is the stuff. It was just too fuzzy. And that didn't work for systems. But I think that if Flourish doesn't succeed, if the one thing we can contribute is this is how you can move these things that were considered soft into measurable, so that you can be rigorous and kind of think about them differently. I think that's the change we're hoping for.
John, I'm curious, do you have trouble finding parents who are willing to put their kids into Flourish School? And assuming the answer is no, if you could expand on that. And then how would you characterize those parents?
I think a lot of, so first of all, we're small schools, so it's 50 to 75 students. And so you basically, our pitch is more or less, look, we're a small school. We know who every child is. They're going to be safe. And by the way, we balance standards and human skills. That's basically the pitch. And most parents are like, well, great. I want my kid to be safe. I do feel like the middle school they're at with 900 kids isn't great for them. And I know that, these things you're talking about, these superpowers are important, and I'm glad that you're taking them seriously. That seems to work almost all of the time. And I think there's a little bit of a parent reaction to the last 25 years in that. It's like, probably before that period, if you'd said, look, we're going to balance these things, we're going to be well balanced, etc. Sometimes that worked, and sometimes parents were like, oh, that's not hardcore enough. I want my kids 2 grade levels ahead or whatever. And there are parents like that. But I think most parents seem to care about this. And I think because we've done schools before, we're not just making it up. I think that's also helpful in the pitch, but we'll see. Like, let's talk when I've got 1,000 or 10,000 kids.
My question is, you've got 50 kids in a school district X, but they all want to apply. Yeah. The school has to meet state standards. Take it from there.
Yeah, they have to play the game. So, they've got to, they don't have to take the high stakes district assessments at the end of the year, but they have to take all the things that, get you into college. So they've got to take AP tests if they want to take that in high school. They've got to take college exams, etc. So as a K-8, we're a little bit outside of the realm of high stakes. It's one of the reasons we don't do high school. Yeah, we'd love to do high school, but high school is the point at which the FOMO just kicks in. Every parent is like, okay, well, what do I need to do to make sure my kid is on this track to get into college? So if you're talking about these stupid human skills and things we care about, you kind of get like swept under the rug a little bit. So in K-8, we're part, the way we're evaluated is by the kids taking some assessment every year. We use an assessment called the NWEA MAP, which is kind of the best value add assessment. How much gain did students make? And that's pretty widely used. You have to do something like that just so that the state can decide, like, are you just, harming children? But it's a low bar compared to what the districts go through.
I think, John, we have to thank you very much for
thank you.
Outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
And, you have made us think a lot. And amongst John's many accomplishments, I want to throw in a trivia accomplishment. He beats the hell out of me in golf.
That's not true. Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me.